Daniel stood nervously at the front of the small church. His hands were sweating, his heart beating faster than ever before. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. He had waited for this moment, dreamed of it, and promised himself he would not let anything ruin it. Beside him stood his bride, Amara, a woman whose smile could light up the darkest day. She was beautiful, not only in looks, but in the way she carried herself, with quiet strength and dignity. To Daniel, she was perfect. But too many others sitting in the rows of wooden pews, she was not. The whispers began even before the ceremony started. A cousin leaned over to another and muttered, "Can you believe he's marrying her?" An older man chuckled under his breath and shook his head as if the whole scene was a comedy show. Laughter came in soft bursts, sometimes hidden behind hands, sometimes not hidden at all. Daniel could hear some of it, and though he tried to focus on Amara's eyes, the sound of it cut into his heart like a knife. Amara heard it too. She noticed the way people stared at her dark skin, the way their eyes narrowed when they compared her to Daniel's pale complexion. Some even turned their heads as though watching a circus act. A few women in the crowd smirked as if they were waiting for the marriage to collapse before it even began. Still, Amara kept her chin high. She had expected this. She had lived through enough judgment in her life to know people could be cruel. But she was not marrying them. She was marrying Daniel. When the priest spoke, his voice was warm and steady, but the atmosphere in the room was tense. There were smiles on faces, yes, but they were not smiles of joy. They were smiles of disbelief, of mockery. It was as if the people had gathered not to celebrate love, but to witness what they thought was a mistake. Daniel's best friend shifted uncomfortably, embarrassed by the giggles coming from the back rows. Amara's aunt squeezed her hand gently, whispering, "Ignore them, child. They don't understand." As Daniel repeated his vows, his voice trembled. He could still hear the laughter in the corners of the church. He knew exactly what they were thinking, that he was foolish, that he had chosen wrongly, that a marriage like this could never survive. But when he looked into Amara's eyes, all of that melted away. Her eyes told him a story of courage, of faith, of love deeper than fear. At that moment, Daniel realized something important. People could laugh all they wanted, but they would never live his life for him. When it was Amara's turn to speak, she lifted her voice with calm confidence. "I promise to stand with you, to fight with you, to love you through every season," she said. The words were simple, but the way she said them carried power. Some in the audience lowered their heads, ashamed for a brief moment, but others still rolled their eyes. One woman whispered loudly, "Let's see how long that lasts." A man chuckled, nudging his friend. Their laughter echoed faintly, bouncing off the walls of the church. Then came the moment everyone waited for, the kiss. The priest announced them as husband and wife, and Daniel leaned forward, his hands gently holding Amara's face. As their lips touched, some clapped politely, but others laughed again, mocking the scene as if it were unnatural. A few even shook their heads in pity. Daniel could feel the sting of those reactions, but he refused to let it ruin the moment. He held Amara close, as if telling the world, "This is my choice, and I will never regret it." Walking down the aisle together, their hands tightly clasped, Daniel and Amara could hear the whispers chasing them. "It won't last," someone muttered. "Give it a year." Others smirked and exchanged looks as if they already knew the ending to a story that hadn't even begun. Yet, beneath all that doubt and ridicule, Daniel and Amara smiled. They smiled because they knew something the crowd didn't. Their love was not built on shallow things. It was built on struggle, trust, and respect. Outside the church, as the sun shone brightly, Daniel turned to Amara and said softly, "Let them laugh. One day, they'll see." Amara squeezed his hand and replied, "Yes. One day, they'll regret it." Her voice was calm but steady. filled with quiet strength. What they didn't know then was just how true her words would become. The laughter, the whispers, the mockery, all of it would soon turn into silence and then into regret. But in that moment, all that mattered was the two of them. Walking together into the unknown, hearts beating as one, ready to prove the world wrong. The wedding was over, and Daniel and Amara thought life would finally calm down. But in truth, their real test had only just begun. The day after the ceremony, the laughter of their guests still echoed in their minds. People who had smiled for photographs were the same ones sending cruel messages behind their backs. Friends who once shared drinks with Daniel stopped calling. Some neighbors even refused to greet Amara when she passed by, pretending not to see her. When they went to restaurants together, the looks were sharp and unkind. Waiters hesitated before showing them a table. Families at other tables sometimes whispered, pointing as if Daniel and Amara were a strange sight in their town. Once, when they walked through a park holding hands, a group of teenagers laughed openly and shouted, "It won't last." Daniel wanted to shout back, but Amara held his hand tightly and whispered, "Don't give them what they want." Bills piled up quickly, too. They had spent most of their savings on the wedding, and now they were starting fresh. Daniel's job at the small repair shop barely covered rent, and Amara's part-time teaching hours weren't enough either. On top of that, Amara faced discrimination at work. Parents whispered that they didn't want someone like her teaching their children. The principal never said it directly, but Amara could see it in his eyes. He was waiting for a reason to let her go. At home, things weren't easier. Daniel's mother avoided visiting, claiming she was too busy. Though the truth was clear, she disapproved of the marriage. His brother had stopped speaking to him altogether, saying, "You've embarrassed the family." Amara's side wasn't much better. A few relatives supported her, but many shook their heads, asking, "Why marry a man who will only bring you pain?" They loved her, but they didn't trust Daniel's world to treat her kindly. But through all of this, something powerful began to grow between Daniel and Amara. Every insult they faced made them stronger. Every challenge forced them to lean on each other. When Daniel came home tired and frustrated, Amara greeted him with a smile and hot tea, reminding him that he was not alone. When Amara cried quietly after work, Daniel held her close and told her he believed in her more than anyone else ever could. Together, they dreamed of something bigger, a life where they were not just surviving, but thriving. Daniel had always wanted to open a small workshop of his own, a place where he could fix cars and machines without taking orders from anyone else. Amara encouraged him. "Why not start now?" she asked one night, her eyes shining with determination. They knew it would be hard, but they also knew they had nothing to lose. So little by little, they saved. Daniel worked longer hours, sometimes coming home past midnight with grease on his hands and exhaustion in his bones. Amara took on extra tutoring jobs, helping children who needed her patience and kindness. The money came slowly, but it came. With every coin saved, with every small step forward, they felt closer to their dream. Still, the outside world didn't stop mocking them. People said they were wasting their time. "That shop will never work," one neighbor scoffed. Another sneered, "What do they know about running a business?" Even some of the same relatives who had laughed at their wedding now whispered that. Daniel and Amara were chasing an impossible dream, but Daniel and Amara refused to give up. One late evening, sitting together on the old couch in their tiny apartment, Amara looked at Daniel and said softly, "Let them talk. We'll show them." Daniel kissed her hand, and for the first time in months, he felt hope instead of fear. And so, the struggles continued. But beneath the weight of debt, judgment, and exhaustion, something beautiful was happening. Their love was not breaking, it was deepening. Their trust was not fading, it was becoming unshakable. They were not only partners in marriage, but partners in a fight, walking side by side against a world that seemed determined to push them down. The people who laughed at their wedding still watched from the sidelines, waiting for the collapse. But instead of collapse, something else was beginning to take shape, something stronger, something unbreakable, something that would one day turn every laugh into silence. 2 years had passed since that day in the church when whispers and laughter followed Daniel and Amara out the doors. The couple who once seemed like a joke to many had quietly built something that nobody expected. Life had not been easy, but step by step, their hard work began to shine. It started with a tiny workshop. Daniel had finally saved enough money to rent a small, broken-down garage on the edge of town. The roof leaked, the floor was cracked, and tools were few, but to Daniel, it was a dream come alive. Amara painted a simple wooden sign with her own hands, Daniel's Repairs. The first day they opened, only one customer came, a man with an old bicycle that needed fixing. Daniel worked late into the night, refusing to take money until the bike was working better than ever. The customer left smiling and returned with 2 more friends the next week. Word spread slowly at first. People remembered Daniel as the man who married that black woman, and some avoided the shop out of prejudice. But those who dared to try his work discovered something surprising. Daniel was honest, affordable, and skilled. He never cheated anyone, never cut corners. Soon, more customers started coming, not because of who he had married, but because of how he treated people. Amara stood beside him every step of the way. While Daniel repaired cars, machines, and bicycles, she managed the books, welcomed customers with her warm smile, and kept the little workshop alive. Some who had laughed at their wedding now walked nervously through the garage doors, their voices awkward. But Daniel and Amara treated them with kindness anyway. Slowly, the laughter that once mocked them was replaced by quiet respect. Then came a moment that changed everything. One evening, a powerful storm tore through the town. Trees fell, homes were damaged, and electricity poles snapped in half. Many families were left in the dark, their daily lives disrupted. Daniel, without hesitation, worked through the night repairing generators and wiring. Amara stayed at his side, handing him tools, bringing coffee, and comforting worried neighbors. By morning, dozens of families had lights again thanks to Daniel's work. People who once doubted him now saw something they could not deny. This couple was not only strong, but also selfless. The same town that once whispered began to say something new. Without Daniel and Amara, where would we be? Amara, too, became a light in the community. She started helping children who struggled in school, offering free tutoring in the evenings. Parents who had once doubted her now knocked on her door, asking if she could guide their sons and daughters. Some were embarrassed, remembering their cruel words, but Amara never turned them away. Every child deserves a chance, she would say with a smile. The couple's small acts of love began to ripple through the town. The workshop grew busier. The children Amara taught began to shine in school. People who had once mocked them now came seeking advice, help, and guidance. 2 years after the wedding, Daniel and Amara stood outside their workshop one morning and watched as customers lined up. Children waved to Amara on their way to school, and neighbors greeted them warmly. It was a scene they had once only dreamed of. Daniel squeezed Amara's hand and whispered, "Do you hear that?" She looked at him, confused. "Hear what?" He smiled. Silence. No laughter. But it wasn't just silence, it was regret. The very people who had laughed now looked at them with respect in their eyes, though guilt often lingered behind it. They regretted their words. They regretted their judgment. And in that regret, they finally understood what Daniel and Amara had known all along. Love built on respect and hard work cannot be broken by mockery. From that day forward, Daniel and Amara were no longer the couple who had been laughed at. They were the couple everyone admired, the ones who had turned cruelty into kindness and doubt into proof. Their love had become unshakable, and their names became a reminder to the town that sometimes the ones we mock are the very ones who will rise higher than anyone else. Asterisk 2. Years after that wedding, filled with laughter and whispers. The town no longer looked at Daniel and Amara the same way. What was once a joke had become a story everyone talked about, but now in hushed tones of regret. Daniel's repair shop had grown from a small garage to a trusted place where people lined up every morning. Cars, bicycles, farm equipment, even broken appliances all came into his hands. And every time, he returned them better than before. People admired his honesty. He never overcharged the poor, often fixing things for free when he knew someone couldn't afford it. Amara kept the business running smoothly, greeting every customer with her warm smile. Her laughter filled the workshop, and her presence gave the place life. The same neighbors who once shook their heads now came daily. Grateful for the couple they once mocked, Amara's influence reached even further. Children she had tutored were now excelling in school. Parents who once doubted her abilities came back, eyes full of shame, but voices soft with gratitude. They remembered the cruel things they had said, yet Amara never reminded them. She only said, "The past is gone. Let's build the future." Her grace left them speechless. Slowly, people began to whisper a new story. They spoke of Daniel's quiet determination, of Amara's kindness, of the way their marriage had not only survived, but blossomed. And as they spoke, regret weighed heavily on their hearts. They remembered the laughter at the wedding, the mocking words, the smirks, the disbelief. Now those memories stung. One evening, Daniel and Amara were invited to a community gathering. At first, they hesitated. They still remembered how cold these people had once been. But Amara insisted they go. "Sometimes people need a chance to make things right," she said softly. When they arrived, the room fell silent. Every eye turned toward them. But instead of laughter, there was only respect tanned guilt. An older woman, who had been one of the loudest critics at their wedding, slowly stood and walked toward them. Her voice shook as she spoke. "I was wrong," she said, her eyes wet with tears. "We laughed at you. We doubted you. And now I see. I see you've built something stronger than any of us ever imagined. Forgive me?" Others nodded. A man who once scoffed and said the marriage would never last now admitted, "I wish I had even half the love and strength you to share." One by one, people came forward, some with words, some with only tears. But all with the same truth: they regretted their laughter. Daniel stood quietly, listening, his arm around Amara. He did not speak much, but when he finally did, his voice was steady. "We never needed anyone's approval," he said, "but we are glad that, finally, you can see what we always knew. Love is not about color. It's about respect, trust, and never giving up on each other." Amara added gently, "We don't hold anger in our hearts. The past is behind us. What matters is what we all do moving forward." Her words, soft yet powerful, touched everyone in the room. That night, as they walked home hand in hand, Daniel looked at Amara with a smile. "Do you remember our wedding?" he asked. She laughed softly. "How could I forget? They laughed at us like we were a joke." Daniel nodded. "And now they regret it." Amara squeezed his hand and whispered, "Yes, because love always wins." From then on, the couple was no longer remembered as the white man and the black woman who shocked everyone. They were remembered as the two people who proved that real love cannot be broken by hate or doubt. Their story spread beyond their small town, inspiring others to believe that true love is stronger than prejudice. And those who had laughed, they carried their regret quietly, knowing they had witnessed something rare and beautiful and failed to see it at the start. They had laughed at love, And in the end, love had the last word.